Hey, what's up, everybody? Welcome back to the fourth episode of the Down the Rabbit Hole podcast. I'm your host, Rob Wall. Today, I want to have a discussion on free will. I've been reading a lot of books lately, including The Denial of Death by Ernest Becker, who is a great student of Freud. And in his book, he talks about terror management, and he mentions Freud, Otto Rank, Adler, and Kierkegaard quite often. And so I've been reading this every morning, and it's a very interesting read. And then yesterday, I read the bulk of Beyond Good and Evil by Fredrick Nietzsche, and it's the first Nietzsche book that I've ever read. And anybody who has that experience reading him probably understands what I went through yesterday. But he really kind of picks apart your reality and challenges everything that you kind of take for granted and hold as a real thing. And so one of the interesting things about reading these two books simultaneously was I started to see the parallels between the two, and Becker and even Rank and some of the other psychoanalysts that are mentioned in The Denial of Death. They were all heavily influenced by Nietzsche, so it's easy to see how that parallel is made there. So anyway, I finished Beyond Good and Evil yesterday, and then this morning I woke up extremely early and could not go back to bed, so I figured I would do some reading before I had to go into work. And so I started to read Notes from the Underground by Dostoevsky, and dear Lord, he comes in out of nowhere and just shatters the whole thing. And all three of these books kind of floating around in my head at the same exact time. I finally, something that I've been pondering about a long time, about this idea of free will, it just sort of clicked. And I didn't want to lose the thought, so I immediately grabbed a pen and started writing down what I was thinking. And that process of writing down my thoughts just turned into like a whole ordeal. By the end, I had written over 10 pages by hand, and after I kind of finally finished my thoughts, I decided to type out my writings. And so I was thinking that I would read this for today's episode, see what you guys think about this. Excuse me. I titled it A Discussion on Free Will, a Social Illusion. As I grow older, it becomes more apparent to me that much of what we regard as control is actually an illusion. Illusions seem to be a common thread woven through the consciousness of every individual. So strong can an illusion be that is held collectively by the masses that entire societies and epochs of civilization can be built upon it, as if it were a firm foundation. What is language? Most would say it is a way in which people communicate with each other. What language attempts to do is to take an idea or object that exists in the world and abstract meaning behind said object/idea. We then take this abstracted meaning and assign a series of sounds that we make by pushing air from our lungs through our throats and out our mouths. When language works properly, the person who is speaking makes the proper sounds in the correct order, and the person listening to those sounds abstracts the meaning behind them. Using their vast stores of previous experience, they are able to understand to an extent what the speaker is trying to say. If the listener is unfamiliar with a certain word, they will be unable to abstract the meaning behind it and would be forced to either fill in the blank as best they can and use context clues, or ask the speaker to clarify the meaning by using a different series of abstractions. Even if the listener understands all the individual words the speaker is saying, that does not mean they understand the message the speaker is trying to convey. Words are meant to jog a listener's memory. They compel the listener to sort through their past experiences and identify with what the speaker is saying. Now, in some instances, this can be quite simple. That's a dog. Upon hearing this, the listener would look at the four-legged furry animal and, having experienced many dogs in the past, know exactly what the speaker means. However, as we begin to talk about more complex ideas, full understanding becomes almost impossible. Religious/spiritual experience is a prime example of this. To many, this is a strange, unexplainable phenomenon. To some, the idea is pure nonsense. To others who have had these experiences, they are as real as any other experience. But try as they may to find just the right words, they will find that their words miss the mark. Ever longer and windier their explanations will get in an attempt to pin down this elusive abstraction. What it boils down to is a lack of previous experience within the listener to draw from. After all, when a speaker tells their story to another who has had this religious/spiritual experience, they will most often come to an understanding. This is perhaps why analogies are an effective tool in teaching someone a new concept. It allows the listener to abstract a series of meanings that they do have previous experience with and draw a parallel with the experience they don't have. Short of that, we have a communication breakdown. So perhaps we can start to see the collectively held illusion that is language starting to break down a bit. After all of our words aren't really words at all. However, I think we can go even further down this line of reasoning and perhaps shatter the illusion completely. If one were to find themselves in a faraway country where not a single soul spoke the same language, that person would find the illusion hopelessly shattered. For what they thought was a solid fact, their ability to communicate via spoken language is now completely useless. They become painfully aware of the illusion and cannot escape the fact that in this new reality, they are uttering meaningless sounds. Money is an abstract symbol of value and therefore also falls into this category of social illusion. Money makes the world go round, some people say. Most of our waking hours are spent in the pursuit of it. Let us, for a second, imagine that society has collapsed and we are living in a post-apocalyptic world. How far would your money get you once the collective illusion is destroyed? The symbolic tokens we use as an abstract unit of measurement of wealth would be reduced to the value of the materials they are made of. Perhaps coins could be melted down and the metal repurposed to make something useful and of actual value. The paper money would probably be used as kindling to start fires. There are countless examples of this collective illusion, but they are outside the scope of the point I am trying to make. I bring it to attention simply to lay the groundwork and to show that if one were to analyze things beyond the call of the everyday, they may find that things are rarely as they seem. Life as an illusion. Let us scale this concept down to the individual as we make our way to the core of the argument. Life is complex beyond comprehension. The possibilities and the combination in which they can be arranged are infinite. The human species is unique in its ability to use its collective experience of the past as a way to predict probable outcomes in the future. However, this ability is limited even among the most capable thinkers. Add an element of random chaos, plus the sheer magnitude of what could actually happen, and we very quickly push our minds past the limits of what we can compute. How then do we manage to accomplish anything? How do we do anything at all? How is it that we are not in a perpetual state of paralyzing fear? Nietzsche suggested that we create illusions in which we live, illusions that abstract the incomprehensible complexity of life into more manageable bite-sized pieces. Some of the early psychoanalysts built upon this theory even further. Freud, Rank, and Adler all had ideas pertaining to the thought that mental health of the individual was contingent upon their ability to firmly hold this illusion in place, to properly function within this illusion, and perhaps most importantly, to find the correct proportion of illusion to live within. Otto Rank in particular had some interesting ideas about the neuroses that develop as a result of this illusion being in the incorrect proportion. His theory stated that too much illusion and the individual's viewpoint became too narrow. There was a lack of possibility and would lead one to become depressed. Not enough illusion, and the individual overwhelmed with possibilities could hardly function. This individual could be viewed as psychotic or schizoid. Carl Jung took this theory in another direction and developed his personality archetypes. In his theory, one's perceptions or illusions could be attributed to an individual's possession of, or perhaps possession by, an ancient archetypal subpersonality. This archetypal personality would come with its own preconceived illusions in which the individual would strive towards immortality as a way of overcoming the human condition. This later became known as the hero's journey, a story which is told over and over again in different forms in countless movies and books. So, in summary, what we perceive as reality is not reality at all, but rather just our perception thereof. This perception is basically an illusion tailored to the needs of an individual. There are as many versions of the world and the people within it as there are individuals to perceive it. Billions. With these billions of individual illusions coexisting in the world, is there such a thing as truth? That is exactly what every religion, philosopher, scientist, and psychologist attempt to figure out. Perhaps this question is at the core of human experience. Maybe this drive to search for the truth and higher meaning is, in fact, the closest we can come to a universal truth. I will leave the answer to this age-old riddle to better men than I. However, we have at last laid the groundwork for the real point I am trying to make. The illusion of control. What exactly is free will? Is free will, like so much else, just another part of the illusion? I have yet to hear a satisfactory explanation of this elusive concept. An attempt at an explanation is the exact purpose of my writings. The greater part of what we consider control is but an illusion. First and foremost, we shall make short work of the idea that we can control the world around us. It does not take any complex mental gymnastics to see that the idea that we can control the people, places, and things about us does not hold up to even mediocre scrutiny. Can we stop the rain from falling? Can we stop the waves of the ocean? Of course we can't. Can we control other people? Well, we sure try to. To a certain extent, we can get people to agree to do certain things. However, this agreement is usually contingent upon their own wants and needs being met, and in reality is a poor substitution for real control. We could try to manipulate, extort, bribe, threaten, and force people to do our bidding, as some tyrants have in the past, but the average person doesn't really have the means necessary to pull this off. And even if they did, the control would only be temporary. After all, most tyrants are eventually overthrown or murdered by the people they oppress in their attempt to control. Which just goes to show you, most of the time, our attempts to control make things worse anyhow. So let us say we give up our futile attempts to control the world around us. Some may be thinking, well, how then will I make my way through the world? Well, perhaps our outer experience arranges itself in likeness to our inner experience. Or, in other words, our inner illusion becomes our outer illusion. This sounds like tempting providence. Why not just arrange our inner selves in a way in which would bring about all that we desire? Anyone who has read a self-help book knows this is not a new concept. The main problem here is that our capacity for self-control is severely overestimated. After all, millions of people have read self-help books claiming to have the secret to manifest wealth. Apparently, the real secret to manifesting wealth is to sell a book to a bunch of people looking for a shortcut. Let us look closer at this idea of self-control. Cognitive behavioral therapy basically states that thoughts plus emotions equal actions. CBT attempts to interrupt this process and dissect its components in an attempt to help one change their behaviors and control how they act. First, let's take a look at our thoughts. On average, we have more than 6,000 thoughts throughout a single day. Chances are we can only recollect a handful of them. How many of them did we consciously will into being? How many of them just drifted into your mind seemingly out of nowhere? How often do we get an idea stuck in our head? No matter how painful or annoying the idea may be, we can do little to nothing to keep it at bay. On the other hand, how often do we forget something that we thought of previously? The metaphysical teacher Emmett Fox suggests the experiment, don't think about the Statue of Liberty. The image of Lady Liberty flashes into mind almost before we fully comprehend the words we are reading. Jung proposed the question, do people have ideas or do ideas have people? Taking all this into account, we start to realize that we have very limited control of the thoughts that pop into our head. Emotions need far less explanation. The body's emotional response to stimuli happens completely outside the control of the one experiencing them. Over millions of years of evolution, the emotional or hormonal responses to stimuli have developed as a survival mechanism. The amygdala, which is centered in the midbrain, works at a much faster rate than the prefrontal cortex, which is responsible for logical thought and higher reasoning. It is this emotional response, followed shortly after by the ensuing thoughts that come about as a result that guide us in our actions that we choose to take. But how much choice is there really? Now, I'm not saying that we have no control over our actions whatsoever. If that were the case, we would probably all be murderers. The point I am trying to make is we only have a limited amount of control. Anyone who has struggled to maintain a diet can easily begin to see this. We attempt to control our actions by limiting the amount of food we consume. But then hunger takes over. Hunger is a hormonal response similar to emotions and often leads to other emotional responses connected to it. Nowadays, we call it hangry. Once this hanger takes over, we often lose control and cheat on our diet. Other examples include the depressed individual that can't get out of bed, the hopelessly in love person who makes a fool of themselves, and the terrible mistakes we make when consumed by anger. Anyone could increase the list. So the question becomes, are we in control, or are our emotions in control? Are we driven to do the things we do and create the illusions in which we live out of fear, love, anger, hate, and the like? The psychoanalysts of the 20th century proposed that we created this illusion to deal with the overwhelming nature of reality and the emotional responses and triggers that are brought about by it. Perhaps they put the cart before the horse. Perhaps the illusion is the source of this reaction, not the result. Plenty of thoughts come and go without the emotional response that drives us to act. And of course, every action we take isn't necessarily driven by emotion. However, we are no longer hunter-gatherers living in the jungle. What we perceive as a threat and what we deem as significant is on a much higher abstracted level, and thus is part of the illusion. Along this line of reasoning, we can see how the illusion sets us up for how we will respond to any given significant situation. Perhaps it's this concept that has caused the human instinct to seek out religious experience. To experience the will of God. Is this experience a divine, universal truth that allows us to leave the illusion behind? Or is it a preconceived illusion developed over millennia of trial and error? An illusion that has been proven to work by millions. That is for each individual to decide for themselves. But regardless, the collective experience of many can create a firm foundation to build upon, as we discussed earlier when we talked about language and money. More importantly than that, we learn a vital lesson here from the religious convert. It is possible to abandon an old illusion that no longer works and accept a new one that does. What is free will? In conclusion, I propose that it is this ability to choose an illusion that is the basis of our free will. That this illusion acts as a foundation of belief that guides us in our reactions and our drives, in how we act, think, and emotionally respond to the events that happen. Events which are completely outside of our control. Once our illusion is firmly fixed, our outer experience responds accordingly, and all other forms of control are extremely limited, or in some cases, a complete illusion. This theory has no quarrel with religious belief, for it was God who gave man his free will. And so this concept could easily be of divine design. And lastly, I propose that the real purpose of prayer and meditation is the process in which we let go of an old illusion and firmly fix new ones. Whether this process invokes a higher power's will to bring about the change, or the repetition that the process requires burns the new ideas into the person's subconscious, is once again a decision the individual must make for themselves. We are all heading to the same destination. We all die in the end. But perhaps we can change the view as we are carried along by the river of time along the way. Well, that concludes what I wrote, and I have Ruby here to have a little discussion on it with me.
Hello. Honestly, I thought it was great. Like in my own personal opinion, just because I feel like these are things that only I like think of, and like they're just thoughts that kind of like float around in my head. Little did I know there's like a whole theory that, like, you know, philosophers have tried to understand for years now. Had no idea that was like actually a thing.
Yeah.
No, but I thought it was extremely interesting.
Well, that was one of the most difficult things I think about reading Beyond Good and Evil. The perception that he has in his writings, I mean, I can identify with thinking like that and viewing the world like that, but I mean, I have to say that when I held that perception, it was one of the most miserable times of my life.
Oh, for sure. And while you were reading, you were talking about like the illusion, and I started thinking about how many things are actually like illusions and just held up by the pure belief that everybody thinks so. Mm-hmm. And like that was like, wow, that's a lot of things that, you know, in our current life, in our day-to-day that we experience, that literally if no one believed in it, it would have no value, like, at all.
Well, I was in a state-funded rehab one time, and this woman was doing...
Nice.
Yeah. It was a shitty place. But on a positive note, this woman came in. She was sort of just doing like charity, I think. She was from Pakistan, and she had a dual doctorate. Which,
wow.
Yeah, it was pretty impressive. She had like a PhD in psychiatry, and a postdoctorate in psychiatry, and then I think she was like a chemical engineer or something like that on top of it.
Damn.
Yeah, she was. Yeah.
She sounds like a badass.
Yeah, probably the most smartest person that I ever met, like in my day to day. You know. And she did this thing with us where I actually got handpicked, like a small group of people that got to do like a group with her alone, because she was really there to give a lecture, but she filled in and did a small group with us, and she did a personality test where we had to write a list of 10 things that we felt were most important to us, and then we had to memorize the order in which we wrote them. So then she takes the papers away from us and quizzes us to see if we could remember the order of everything.
Oh, you've told me this.
Yeah, it was a pretty wild experience, and like just how you did in the test, she basically could tell you your whole life story just from doing this little exercise. It was pretty amazing. And then she even went on to say, like, what she would do is, like, after everybody went and tried to guess the order, she would ask everybody like how we thought that they did, you know, and everybody would like spout out like how many they thought they got right, how many they got wrong. And she explained later that we're actually like not consciously, but we're actually rating what we think of the individual when we do that, you know.
Oh, for real?
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. Which is unfortunate, because there was one guy I was just like 2.
Oh my god.
You piece of shit. But anyway, I'm getting sidetracked here. But I asked this because I ended up getting all 10 right, which was me and one other guy, I think, were able to get all 10 right, but she really fucked with my head.
Yeah, I remember when you told me this, that you were like, yeah, those are it. And she's like, are you sure?
Yeah, she kept telling me that I was so close and that I had just switched two of them up, trying to like trick me into changing the order because I had spouted them off so quickly and gotten them all right. So she really tried to play mind games with me, but I didn't let her get into my head, and I just stuck to my guns, and it turned out that I was right. So she was pretty impressed by that, and she allowed us to ask a question afterwards, and this was like basically what I just wrote about was the nature of what I asked her. I had not gotten as far in this whole thought process, but at the time I was in bad shape, and life was really bad, and I had lost a couple years of sobriety, so I had a spiritual experience as a result of working steps, and a new world came into view. And then once I relapsed, obviously that world disappeared and a new one snapped back into place. And it really made me question on whether or not what I had experienced was real or not.
I've had that thought process. I've definitely had that thought process, like, because I had, a white light experience when I had a year and a half. And, like, since then, I've definitely had a lot of conversations with my sponsor, like, asking that kind of question, like, was it valid? Did I actually experience a white light? And if I did, then, like, why wasn't I able to, like, remain sober? And, like, obviously now, like, that I've come to an understanding that, like, consistency was the problem, and, like, what I experienced was real. It's just I didn't expand on it. Therefore, it was yesterday's sobriety.
Yeah.
So, you can only do that for so long until it's downhill from there.
Yeah. Well, when I went into that place, I definitely had a belief that life was terrible, and that there was no point in living anymore.
No, most definitely.
Which, I mean, I even at the time, like, even though I didn't emotionally feel this way, I could tell that was probably not the truth. It was just what I was feeling.
Yeah.
But on the other end of the picture, I looked at my experience in sobriety, and I couldn't shake the feeling that I was like a scared child in the dark, just whistling a tune to keep his spirits up, And so I started to look at it as like, I'm either lying to myself in a good way or I'm lying to myself in a bad way. But where is the truth in this all? Is there any such thing as truth, And, as smart as this woman was, she really didn't have like a definitive answer. She attempted to explain something similar to what I just wrote about, basically she painted a picture of like many paths that you can take through life, and being able to change what path you're on. But I don't know if there's really any way to get any closer than that.
Oh, for sure. I mean, not without losing your mind in the process.
Well, that's true. It's always an option.
There's always most definitely there is always an option to go down into the depth of that.
Yeah, and that was kind of, I mentioned that in the writing. The belief that the schizophrenic, for example, is somebody who experiences too much reality, and their brain can't compute.
When you said that, I was literally like, wow.
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense.
No, 100%.
In that way. And it's like they're driven mad by the infinite possibility that they can see. But and here's the other thing that I didn't write about. But if you were to study like the work of like Otto Rank, for example, he would really dive into, I think in some of his most famous works, actually, he talks about artists and how artists are neurotic, but they have talent, and they're able to channel the neuroticism into a talent and kind of keep sane in the process. You know, a lot of time, I mean, look at somebody like Van Gogh. He cut his own ear off, you know. So it's like an artist views the world in a much different way than the average individual.
Talk about mentally stable.
Yeah. You know, so the difference between a crazy person and, or what is it? The line between genius and crazy is very narrow.
Oh, for sure. That is the thinnest line that you probably ever come across.
Yeah, because it's, you know, men of genius could be driven insane by their own mind, you know.
Yeah, and basically what we were just talking about, like, if we really got down to, like, the truth.
Yeah.
Air quotes, the truth, and whatever the truth is. And
that's a common theme that Dostoevsky writes about as well, you know, because I think he was tortured by his own mind, and he envied the average man. I mean, he had us a whole book about it. It's called The Idiot.
Sounds alcoholic.
Yeah, I don't know.
Like, look, watching somebody that drinks with impunity, like, that's like that's the first thing that came to my mind when you said that.
Yeah, well, that's like a neuroses or neurosis. I ain't a scientist. But that's like its own neurotic behavior, you know.
I'm a scientist.
I ain't a scientist. I just drink till I shit my pants a few times.
I ain't ordered nothing off of no pooter before.
Another interesting fact about Dostoevsky is he was epileptic. And epileptic people sometimes have these rare symptoms where their consciousness will start to expand right before they're going to have an epileptic fit and go into a seizure. And like right as their consciousness is about to expand into infinity, they seize out.
That's crazy.
Yeah, it's wild. The first time I heard this concept, it was hard to believe.
What?
Yeah, and
that actually happens to people.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's like he's not like the only documented case of this happening. It happens with epileptics sometimes, but
what?
Yeah,
that's crazy.
Yeah, that's why, you know, he wrote on a different level in a way, because he was able to see reality from a different vantage point, and ultimately, I think that condition is what killed him. You know, because I don't think he lived to be very old. Keep in mind, you know, he was living in the early to mid 1800s. You know?
I mean, when you're having seizures, there's no oxygen going to your brain, and whenever there's no oxygen going to your brain cells die.
Yeah.
And after a certain amount of brain cells dying, you don't have any brain activity.
Yeah, I mean, that was still in the time period where like a shitload of people were still dying from like tuberculosis.
Oh, for sure.
They called it consumption back then, but you know.
Ew.
Yeah, it would slowly.
That sounds like a gross word for that. Consumption.
Yeah. Oh, I've been consumed.
I was supposed to say I've been consumed. What the hell?
Yeah.
Oh my god.
But yeah, I don't know. I'm not through Notes from the Underground yet, but like every other freaking chapter is just blowing my mind. You know what? Here, I'll actually just read this paragraph out of Notes from the Underground, just in case anybody's been thinking about picking up Dostoevsky. But this had me chuckling and also kind of blew my mind at the same time. And why are you so firmly, so triumphantly convinced that only the normal and the positive, in other words, only what is conducive to welfare, is for the advantage of man? Is not reason in error as regards advantage? Does not man, perhaps, love something besides well-being? Perhaps he is just as fond of suffering. Perhaps suffering is just as great of benefit to him as well-being. Man is sometimes extraordinarily, passionately in love with suffering, and that is a fact. There is no need to appeal to universal history to prove that. Only ask yourself if you are a man and have lived at all. As far as my personal opinion is concerned, to care only for well-being seems to me positively ill-bred. Whether it's good or bad, it is sometimes very pleasant, too, to smash things. I hold no brief for suffering, nor for well-being either. I am standing for my caprice, and for its being guaranteed to me when necessary. Suffering would be out of place in vaudevilles. For instance, I know that in the Palace of Crystal it is unthinkable. Suffering means doubt, negation, and what would be the good of a palace of crystal if there could be any doubt about it? And yet I think man will never renounce real suffering, that is, destruction and chaos. Why, suffering is the sole origin of consciousness. Though I did lay it down at the beginning that consciousness is the greatest misfortune for man, yet I know many prizes it and would not give it up for any satisfaction. Consciousness, for instance, is infinitely superior to twice two makes four. Once you have mathematical certainty, there is nothing left to do or to understand. There will be nothing left but to bottle up your five senses and plunge into contemplation. While if you stick to consciousness, even though the same result is attained, you can at least flog yourself at times, and that will, at any rate, liven you up. Reactionary as it is, corporal punishment is better than nothing.
Jeez.
Yeah.
That's definitely gonna liven you up.
Yeah, he really plays with your mind.
For real. I was like, it was a little hard to follow now, I'm not gonna lie.
Yeah. Yeah, you gotta take it piecemeal, I think, sometimes.
I feel like your brain is like adjusted to like the writing of these authors just because like you literally read every day.
Yeah.
And like I don't. So like hearing like little excerpts and stuff like that, especially when you're reading it a little like just like fluently like that, I'm like wait what?
Yeah. Well, this book is set up like a fictional diary, and it's very philosophical, and so yeah, it's one of those books you need to like take a little bit slower. Some of his other novels, which are more like stories, they're a little bit easier to read. But anyway, I think this was kind of like an impromptu surprise little recording session we did here. I after writing that stuff all day, I wanted to share it with the world, so I think that'll do it. I've got a few people scheduled to sit down and make some other episodes. We're throwing around some good ideas for topics. Mindfulness was thrown around, spirituality. But we'll see, check the schedule and see when we could sit down and make it happen. But until then, take care of yourself, guys. I'll see you next time.